I got really sick before like about 6 months before the TEDx talk.
Mm-hmm.
And I was recovering. And instead of saying, you know what, I'm probably not in the right place to do this TEDx talk, I was white knuckling this thing, believing that standing on this red circle carpet was going to change my life.
Are you going through life blind? This is Eyes Wide Open with Nick Thompson. On this podcast, we share knowledge and stories that build human connection while elevating stigmatized societal issues such as mental health, holistic wellness, culture, free speech, and more, all to ensure we show up in the world with our eyes wide open. Welcome to an all-new episode of Eyes Wide Open. Our guest today is Shelley Paxton, and Shelley is a former Chief Marketing Officer, or CMO, of Harley Davidson, a public and TEDx speaker. She's the author of the best-selling book, Soulbatical, A Corporate Rebel's Guide to Finding Your Best Self, a copy that I am lucky enough here to have right on my desk that was shared with me over a year ago now. But also, she is the Chief Soul Officer that's leading the revolution to redefine what success looks like. Thank you for coming on today. How are you doing?
Oh my God, Nick, I'm so good. Thank you for the invitation. And you know, I'm a huge fan. I'm happy that we finally get to have this conversation and share it with everyone.
I know, me too. It's so fun. It's actually funny. I was thinking about this earlier today too. Like, we're like a 10-minute walk or drive from each other. And we, it would have been cool to do this in person, but I don't have any way to do that. So, but
next time.
So we got introduced from a gentleman named Brian, who you've worked with and I've worked with on different projects. He actually helped me start this podcast, which is interesting. So now we've known each other over a year and a half, and it's weird because our paths have like crossed and intertwined through different people and all of that. So it's fun to be able to do this and share your really kind of crazy story with the audience.
Yes, I'm excited too. And I feel like the further you and I get into our journey together, like the more aligned our work is and the deeper we've been able to go. And so it feels like this is exactly the perfect time for us to be having this conversation and sharing it with your audience.
I completely agree with you. And, you know, I actually have a friend who I know he's asked about this before because he's a big Harley Davidson fan, and he like works up in Wisconsin and Milwaukee every Saturday as a part-time job. And so I think just hearing your story and all that's going to be super cool. And I find it that it resonates. But before we get into that, I guess this is kind of like the prequel to that. What did you want to be when you were growing up? And then how did that change to lead you through your incredibly successful professional career to what you're doing now?
Yeah, well, that is a long and winding story. I will give you the headlines.
My work is done today. I'm just going to sit back and...
Well, you could give me like a 3-hour stage to answer that question, but I promise I'm going to give you a few headlines, and then you know me, like my heart and soul are open books, and we can take this wherever we want to take this. So to answer your question, I actually really wanted to be an architect. So when I was really little, my absolute favorite toy and activity was playing with Legos. And I would build. So this is obviously, I'm 54 years old. I grew up way before anybody had digital devices and all the things that kids play with today. But I love that Legos are still a thing and they are cooler than ever. And so
sophisticated,
right? I still build stuff with my nephew. It is one of our favorite activities to do together. But imagine like little Shelley, my favorite thing to do in the basement of our childhood home was just to build these imaginary homes and imaginary worlds. Like I was this visionary and this kind of architect, and I could see myself doing that. And then I started to learn more and more about what my dad did. So I grew up with a father who started out in the world of, he kind of came from nothing. His dad had a shoe store on a little main street in this tiny town outside of Cincinnati, Ohio. And my dad was like the first in his family to go to college. He was like, I'm going to get out of here. And he went into marketing, advertising and marketing, which, little teaser for where the rest of my story is going. And he started to help really big brands, like back in the day, and your audience may be too young, but there was this iconic character, Speedy Alka-Seltzer, who was like famous for Alka-Seltzer's like a cold medicine, right?
Yeah.
And Speedy Alka-Seltzer was like this old time, really cool character. My dad helped to kind of reinvent and bring new life back to that whole.
He had wasn't he like a
brand.
little pill or a dissolvable thing that he had legs and arms? I remember him.
Oh my God. Okay. I thought for sure that I was like going back way too far. So that was like my dad's early days. And then he ultimately took us all up to Minneapolis, Minnesota, where he went like his whole career trajectory, like literally a rocket ship, was working for Pillsbury. So you guys know the Doughboy, Pillsbury Doughboy, and Jolly Green Giant. And so he really like his career took off, and he was leading marketing for the big brands, like resurrecting those characters. They were icons of their time, working with the ad agencies. And I started to pay attention, and I was like, this is sort of interesting. This seems really sexy. And, it was kind of the Mad Men days of advertising when you think back to like when he was doing it. And so I ultimately got kind of caught up in that and ended up going to school in the business school at Boston College, and I majored in marketing, and I kind of tripped my way into following in my dad's footsteps, which is also planting a seed for, sort of the awakening I got much later in life. But suffice it to say, that's, I kind of walked away from this little Shelley vision of being an architect and building things, because I was like, I can't go, I don't know math and engineering, and I'm a creative. Mm-hmm. So I kind of fell in love with what my dad did. And I really, without understanding it at the time, wholeheartedly took on my dad's success script.
Oh, wow. Which, I mean, kind of makes sense that would happen. Can I ask a sidebar on that? What was your first marketing job? Like, what did you do?
So I had 2 internships at Leo Burnett, which is one of the most iconic advertising agencies, actually here in Chicago. Yep. So I went to school at Boston College. I was out in Boston. I came here for 2 summers in a row. And then I ended up taking a job at DDB, another iconic, DDB Needham, is another iconic, in fact, I was just on the phone with them today, how funny, advertising agency. And I spent the first many years of my career and cutting my teeth on some of the most incredible brands. So a more specific answer to that. So I was at DDB in Chicago, one of the most well-known iconic agencies. And my very first job was on Wheaties, General Mills brand Wheaties cereal, working with Michael Jordan because he was their spokesperson in the day.
I can't believe it. I was going to ask that because in my head I was doing the timing, and I'm like, that's the Michael Jordan Wheaties.
Yep, 100%. And of course, there were many other athletes and champions and famous people. But I really got to cut my teeth first on Wheaties in the Jordan days, and then on McDonald's. And then McDonald's ended up taking me internationally, globally. I went to live in Istanbul, Turkey. I think you know this part of my story. I write about it. But I ended up helping McDonald's really position themselves, build teams, and like grow their business in Southern Europe, North, South Africa, Middle East, and India, which gave birth to my love for the world and me calling myself a global citizen. But you can imagine at this point, I'm like, I'm sticking with this job and this career because it's taking me around the world and I am doing the most epic things. So it makes sense why I stayed in it for as long as I did.
It does. It's so interesting too, because you got to go work with these like giant brands, like, which It's funny because I don't know if I told you this, but how I got into marketing was that I actually was going to school for something else, and I took a marketing class as an elective, and I was like,
Huh.
oh, this is cool. And then I ended up getting my first job, but I wasn't sure. My degree was in business, right? So then I got my first job working at Motorola. And I was like, Mark, I'm going to be a CMO someday, when I learned the story of the guy who was the CMO at Motorola who came up with Hello Moto. Do you remember that?
Oh,
Hello,
wow. I
Hello
totally
Moto.
remember that. Of
And I was
course.
like, I want to be the guy that comes up with Hello Moto, just like you wanted to be the person who comes up with the Alka Seltzer guy and all of
Yeah.
that stuff. So funny
Yeah.
how we like kind of had a very similar piece there. But then
Yeah.
you got to go work for these global brands across the world. Did you like help McDonald's break into these markets, or was it more of a growing them in these markets?
Growing them in these markets. It was helping them grow and sort of culturally adapt in these
Yeah.
markets. They were in all the markets that I was in. So I was helping them grow, and I was also helping our agency grow our share of the McDonald's business in all of these regions. And
Yeah.
ultimately, I went on to a global McDonald's role. I helped win and run the global visa business for
Oh,
a
wow.
period of time. Intel. I then left and went to AOL. Remember back in the day, there was this company called AOL and the .com boom before the
Yep.
bust. I went to AOL 11 days before they bought Time Warner. So I was part
Oh,
of that early group of people that was like trying to figure out how this seamless blending of all media platforms was going to work. Like the thing that's a no-brainer to all of us today back
don't even
in
think
2000,
twice.
right?
Do you remember AOL used to have like their own versions of web pages?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think back to that now, and I'm like, what the hell? We had no idea what we were doing with the internet when it first started. It was
No, when I think we were building Shop at AOL, the very first
yeah.
e-commerce platform, and it looked like a mall. You literally like bought residences, like virtually. It was
Gee.
insane when I think back to what we were doing. But you know what? Just like we always are, and like this is a life lesson for me and is probably worth saying here for anyone who needs to hear it, because I need to hear it every day. We
Mm-hmm.
are making it up every single day. Please never forget, even today in my life, in my business, I'm making it up every day. I'm taking little tiny steps forward every day. Like if we are truly putting our work out there, there's never any certainty or any guarantee or any perfect roadmap for what it looks like. So I realize now I can draw on that experience. I'm like, well, I've been making it up for decades. This is helpful to draw upon.
That's so true. And I'm actually going to remind myself of that mantra, because I think too, I think it also like not recognizing that feeds imposter syndrome, because you
Yeah.
feel like you should have it figured out. And I remember, like, I know I've shared this with you before, like when I became interim CMO at a software company, I was like, what the fuck am I doing here? I'm like, I
Yeah.
don't belong in these executive meetings. I'm like 35 years old. Like, what the?
Mm-hmm.
I shouldn't be leading this whole team. I shouldn't have this much responsibility, because, I think it, and I think that not recognizing that we're making it up every single day as we go, learning as we go, and taking that tiny learning and, ever so slightly pushing things forward, you can
Yes.
become totally paranoid and frozen in with imposter syndrome.
Yeah. Can I make two comments on that? I
Yeah.
think this is so juicy, and hopefully helpful for your listeners. One is every badass accomplishment is a series of tiny steps. Like there is no such thing as an overnight success. We all know it, but I think in this Instagram, TikTok world,
Mm.
everything starts to look like, and everyone starts to look like an overnight success. There's no such thing, right? Most of these people have been slaving away, taking tiny, brave steps every day for decades.
Mm.
So, important reminder. And here's
That's
the
a
Shelley
really good
Paxton,
reminder.
right? And here's the Shelley Paxton perspective on imposter syndrome, because I do believe that it's real. And I know there's a lot of debate on, is it real? Does it impact women more than men? All these things. And here's the thing, I think it's real. And I also want to remind everyone, like people will say to me, oh, I wish I had your confidence. And I was like, listen, I wasn't born with this confidence. And also I don't have confidence every single day. What I've learned is that courage begets confidence, not the other way around.
That is freaking genius. You should trademark that because you're absolutely, no, for real.
It's
You're
in the book.
absolutely
It's
right.
in the book.
Yeah.
But I just did a reel on this, but I think it's really important to say, like, so my invitation to everyone listening to this conversation is take one tiny courageous step a day toward what feels aligned, toward your desires, your dreams, your truth, whatever that looks like, because that starts to build the courage muscle, which is basically confidence in progress. And it's such an easier way. And maybe for me, it's a less overwhelming way to process this idea of doing big things.
I couldn't agree more. And you're right. Cause I think sometimes, and I'm guilty of this, I look at something and it's this big, giant, a coworker shared this with me. He's like, there's an elephant in the room and everyone's like talking about the elephant, but no one's like figuring out, oh, we've got to take this thing down and we got to start by cutting it up into smaller pieces so we can remove it. And instead people are just like, there's this giant elephant in the room and you become like frozen with paranoia or imposter syndrome to like take that first step. And I know I am so guilty of that. I'm so guilty of not breaking it down into tiny little chunks and just.
Oh God, me too. Which is why every single thing I say every day on podcasts and off is also a reminder to me. I mean, honestly, like Nick, I think every conversation you and I have ever had, like we're holding up the mirror to ourselves and each other. And I think that's the beautiful thing. And I love that you do that with this podcast as well, because I endeavor to practice everything I preach, and I preach because I need to learn and I want to live my truth. And and I'm human.
Right. Well, I also love that you have the awareness to know that you're kind of like coaching yourself in real life and in real time as well. And that's a good thing. I also remember, I think it was it might've been that time we went to Soho House for a few hours, but there was one point where you said, you basically, you kind of said that you're like figuring it out as you go essentially. And that with your speaking and you were getting ready for your TED talk and all of this stuff. And then I remember you were like telling me like, I have to just kind of like, I have the TED talk in my head. I have to like sit down and write it, I think was what you had said. And so, but you finally did it. Right. But that whole TED talk, which I just listened to today, and everyone, the link is in the show notes. I highly recommend it. I remember just listening back to it today and thinking to myself, wow, like, and I remember you said too, there was a moment where you like lost your way. I can't pick that up at all when I listen to it. So that was like a you thing that no one else I think picked up on.
No, here's I think this is another, I don't know that we've had this conversation, but there's no time like the present and in front of a large viewing audience. So the reason that you can't pick it up is because of the magic of video editing. And so I want to make a confession here that I think is a really important story to tell. And I've started to tell this in little bits, but I want to say this publicly. And I'm going to I don't know if it's going to be part of my next book or just maybe a series of posts, or I don't know what it is, but I want to share it here because I feel like this will lead us somewhere really interesting, or maybe just somebody needs to hear this today. So I got really sick before like about 6 months before the TEDx talk. Mm-hmm. And I was recovering. And instead of saying, you know what, I'm probably not in the right place to do this TEDx talk, I was white knuckling this thing, believing that standing on this red circle carpet was going to change my life. Because I think so many of us do, whether it's TEDx for you or not, whatever that thing is in your life where you're like putting all of your eggs, or all of your votes on that thing. You're like, it's the silver bullet. It's going to turn things around. It's going to make me famous, whatever it is. Right. And I realize now in hindsight that that's how I was thinking about TEDx. The reality was I was still very sick. I had intense brain fog. I look back and I don't even recognize myself. I didn't look like myself. I didn't sound like myself. Still watch, like I still love the content. The content is me. The content is 1,000,000% my message. But what ended up happening is here I am white knuckling my way, not feeling well, to stand on this, on this red rug for, and you have to memorize your talk. And first of all, I'm not great at memorization. And I have all this brain fog because of my illness. And I stand there, and in the middle of my talk, I just went, and I am a very seasoned speaker. So I didn't get on stage feeling like, I wasn't nervous. This wasn't something new to me. I mean, I was a little nervous, but anyway, I completely lost my way. I am like the deer in the headlights. There's a live audience of about 100 people. It was a relatively small event. And I am like, oh shit, like this has never happened to me before. And I literally said that to the audience. I just started laughing, and I looked around and I'm like, I have never had this happen before. Like, I don't know what one does in this situation. So I literally was like, I think I'm going to rewind. And if I take a couple steps back and then I come back on the carpet and I kind of start this thing over. Anyway, I did that 2 or 3 times.
Oh.
I kid you not. And so what they were able to do is piece together something that sounded close enough to the talk that I originally intended to give. And I think that's an important thing to remind us of, because everything looks so polished and so perfect. And not everyone is given a perfect TED talk or perfect TEDx talk or perfect whatever. There's so much that can be done to make everything look beautiful and look like everyone else has their shit together but me. And you know what? It's not the truth. So I wanted to call that out, because still do the thing. Like, I am a believer, like, do the thing. If it is your dream, like, do the thing. Just don't white knuckle your hold on it. Like, I don't know, high intention, low attachment to outcome, as one of my dear friends says. Like, just let it go, let it be, show up powerfully, and then what's going to happen is going to happen. But that was a huge lesson for me that I still think about to this day.
Well, I didn't realize it was 2 or 3 times. So what's really like 2 things as an outsider from obviously not being there and not seeing the slip ups. What I think is so impressive there is that you didn't melt down. Right. You adapted in this situation and made it work for you so that you could finish your mission, finish your speech. Right. What is also probably very cool about that, I know when I watch someone like you speak in that format, or I watch someone, I do a lot of events for work and stuff. So I'll see someone give a keynote of some sort. I'm sitting there and I'm like, I don't know how someone can do this. Like, I can speak, but I have to if I prepare it too much, it's not good and I forget it.
Yeah.
I'm much better to have here's the 5 bullets I'm going to cover and just kind of wing it in a sense. But when I see someone like you speak, I'm like, how do they do it? And I guarantee you had a bigger impact on more people by having those slip ups in there, becoming a little bit more relatable and down to earth. Because even at first when I met you, I'm like, why the F would the former CMO of Harley Davidson want to get coffee with me? Like, I literally thought about that, because I would look at, as someone in marketing and someone who's, the imposter syndrome, and I still feel sometimes like I'm the kid in the room. So I can imagine that made people feel made you be so much more relatable to more people. And then to watch you recover the way you did and reset and still finish your objective there, I think is so relatable, probably more
Mm.
than you've maybe
Thank
thought
you.
through.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that I did. I somehow, some way. I mean, listen, this is grit and resilience, right? Like we can dig deep. I knew I had a message to communicate, and I was going to find a way to do it, whether it sounded exactly like a script that had been written or not. I kind of just dug deep and went into my soul. And then I just got real comfortable with whatever was going to come out was going to come out. I also want to give credit to every single person in that room because the audience was so incredibly supportive. And I think there's a
Yes.
lesson in here too, is that, we're often like, oh my God, the audience or whoever's listening or watching or around us, they're going to skewer us if we screw up. It's exactly the opposite. The love and the compassion and the empathy and the support. They were cheering for me. They were clapping. They wanted me to finish. They wanted me to know that even though I had no family and friends in that audience, but they were my family and friends and they were there for me. And so that also made me realize, like, yeah, okay, so there are some haters out there. Brene Brown always says, yeah, the people in the cheap seats are the ones who are going to hurl the insults and throw the rotten tomatoes, but they're not in the arena and they're not playing. The people who are in the arena and who want to, most of them want to see you win, and
Yeah.
they're going to be there. And that is 100% what I experienced that day, which restored my faith in humanity because, for most of us, it's been quite shaken recently and
Very
currently.
true. Very true. I mean, and those people that will throw the tomatoes, I feel like online and social media, and obviously, some of my experience with that, those people with the tomatoes, like they are infiltrating lower and lower into that arena slowly.
Yeah.
So that's such a warming story to hear, though. And I do, I think a lot of times I don't have a lot of faith in humanity, I'll be honest, but I try to tell myself too that one, people are doing the best they can with the tools that they have, and no one's deliberately choosing. That's not true. People are choosing to be certain ways, but you know what I mean. Like people are
Yeah.
really doing the best that they can, and I
Yeah.
think
In the
too,
moment with what they have.
right?
Absolutely.
And then
I absolutely try to view everything through that lens. Some days better
yeah,
than others.
right. Well, same here. And then, as you said earlier, they're making it up every day, just like you are, and every moment. So it's really
True.
a heartwarming story that I think is good. And the other thing too is people want a hero. Like they want to see someone overcome something because it instills belief in themselves and it instills belief in the person that they're viewing or idolizing or learning from in the case of like a TEDx talk. So it is kind of like a hero's journey and people want to watch that even if you fuck
Yeah.
up.
And you know what? Thank you. I'm really glad this came up organically because I am going to talk more publicly. I said even before it came out, that it was not a great day. Like I felt like I had a lot of PTSD around the whole
Mm.
experience. But now I'm at a place where it's like the wound has become a scar, and I'm really happy to talk about the lessons and the learnings, all the stuff that we're starting to get at here, because it is an important story. I will still, like, I'm a public speaker. I love to stand on stage. I don't memorize everything like you. I have a flow. I know my points. I've got my slides. I even have my zinger lines, but I also am present enough and I
Mm.
trust myself enough to engage with what and who is in the room. And so it hasn't prevented me from standing on more stages and, bigger and bigger stages for that matter. So these things build character. They will
They
not kill
do.
you. Keep chasing your dreams. If I can do it, anyone can do it. Whew, recovering from that was a tough one,
I
but
can't.
I love telling the story.
I remember you didn't, because you didn't tell me all of that, but I remember you telling me how like you were being really hard on yourself about it. And it kind of goes back to what you're saying about social media too. And one of the things I like about social media in kind of its evolution, and it's not fully there where like at the beginning of it, but people that are like saying, oh, like post the flaws, don't put a filter on, you don't have to do makeup to go on an Instagram live, and really like all these kind of things to like show being more real, right? And I remember I
Yeah.
had I filmed a reel. This was a year or so ago now. And in the middle of it, my phone fell over and I just left it in there. So I'm like, by the time I edit
Yeah.
this, like, who cares? Like, I'm sitting here talking to my phone to my, followers on Instagram. Sometimes people drop their phones. So I think we're getting maybe more accepting of those things, especially through social media. But hearing,
I love that. I
yeah,
love it. I mean, listen, my whole mission now is like, I mean, it's so connected to what you just said, because it's about redefining success in a way that celebrates humanity and well-being and soul. And like the humanity and the soul is all the stuff, and frankly, the well-being, because it's about mental, physical, emotional, spiritual well-being. It's all, everything you and I are talking about leading up to this point is all in what I believe. And I want to see that carried through in a bigger way, especially how we define success in this world and especially in this country.
you know what? It's funny, that theme of what defines success and people wanting to rewrite it. I've had career coaches, I've had burnout experts on this show, and these are all things that have like organically started coming up really in probably the last 6 months or so. And I think you're spot on with that. I want to get into more of that and like what your mission
What
is and
brought
stuff.
me there?
Right. Like let's do the nonlinear storytelling part of it
I
now.
love it.
I want to go back to, you've been incredibly successful as a marketer. And then you ended up, and I remember you saying this was the coolest job, being the CMO of Harley Davidson. And you were riding around the country on motorcycles. Correct me if I'm
The
misremembering.
world of motorcycles.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden that wasn't working for you anymore. So how did you end up at Harley Davidson? And then how did this start to change for you to where you finally pulled the plug and were like, this isn't for me?
Yeah, so I was going around the world working mostly like on the advertising and media agency side of the whole of the advertising and marketing business. Then did my stint at AOL. Then I went back into media, big global jobs within Omnicom Media Group. I mean, literally, I could have ridden into the sunset doing that work. I worked on such cool brands, the ones I was telling you before. And then I got a call from a guy who was a dear friend of mine. We had started our careers together back at DDB in Chicago, to take us back
Oh,
to the
wow.
beginning of the conversation. He had remained a dear friend. He was a huge motorcycle rider, and he had gone to Harley as their very first chief marketing officer. They had finally sort of formalized the role in the company. And he calls me, wants to have a conversation. We meet up here in Chicago, reconnect. And he basically said, I am trying to formalize this and gel a global marketing organization, like truly pull together the whole globe. And he said, I'm looking at your career. When I was thinking about what does this role look like and who could possibly come in and do this, I just kept coming back to you, because I look at all the brands that you've worked on. You've been around the world, you've done global marketing, and now I know you haven't done it on the brand, on the client side, but you can bring all that experience into Harley. And I'm like, yeah, I get all of that, but you're missing one big piece. I don't ride motorcycles. It's like, hello, that seems to be a really important piece to this whole thing. So anyway, he was like, actually, Shelley, I mean, I hadn't even worked in the automotive business. I'd probably touched every category except for automotive. One. Yeah. And, and power sports, right? Like the two that would be most relevant. And he was like, actually, I think that's a huge selling point, because by that point in time, they were beyond the turnaround. They had brought in a new CEO who was really kind of bringing the company forward into a new era. And he was like, that's not what we need. We need fresh blood. We need fresh perspective. So the fact that you could come in with all this other industry perspective and this global marketing experience is what we're looking for. So I went through the whole process, interviewed all the way up to the CEO of Harley Davidson at the time. And it was fascinating because I was, of course, intrigued. Who's not intrigued when Harley Davidson comes calling? I mean, I even say in my keynote, I'm like, yes, the brand that people love so much that they tattoo it on their body.
Yes,
Right?
for real.
And as a marketer, I mean, there's no greater honor than people ink your brand on their body. And that is a huge legacy to steward and to uphold and to have your fingerprints on as a marketer. And so I didn't take it lightly, but I really started to think, wow, if I was going to do this once in my career, go from the agency side to the client side, I could never imagine doing it at like a big consumer product goods company.
No, that'd be boring.
Well, also, or even McDonald's, who'd been my client forever. I was just like, that wouldn't work. My spirit is too rebellious. And I'm like, wait a second, rebellious spirit, finally, I was just like, oh my God, I can't resist this anymore. And I just come out of a fresh divorce. I was ready to reinvent myself, get my mojo and badassery back. So, I mean, you talk about like those inflection points in your life where you just go, all signs are pointing to this. And I was listening and I ended up saying yes. And I moved up to Milwaukee and I learned how to ride motorcycles. And because that was the other thing, is like, even though I didn't ride, they were like, you don't have to ride. We can't force people to ride.
Right.
I understood how deeply rooted in the culture of Harley and in the understanding of the brand riding was, because events that happen around the world, these big motorcycle rallies, like that's the fabric of what this brand is all about. So I knew I needed to be in that culture and be able to speak that language and to be able to relate to the customers, at the, on the most
in a like
intimate
real
level.
way instead of this
In a very
superficial
real way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I did. I learned how to ride a motorcycle. And
so I got to ask, was that intriguing to you, like that piece of it where it's like, I'm going to learn how to ride motorcycles and become part of this community? Like, or was that like, oh shit, this is something I have to do, I'm not really excited about it? Or...
No, they said from the beginning, you don't have to do this. So I honestly, I mean, did I feel a little pressure? Yeah, of course I did. I'd be lying if I said I felt no pressure because, 95%, that's not an official stat, but I think it's probably damn close, at least at the time that I was there. 95% of the people in the Harley world rode motorcycles.
Yeah.
So I wanted to be a part, and I'm not talking about just customers. Of course, 100% of customers ride motorcycles, but like in, our even relating to our dealers, right? Harley dealers. Like I thought, how could I have an authentic conversation with this powerful dealer network? So anyway, I was excited because I was like, well, this is a badass thing to do. And Nick, I was 40 years old at the time. So I don't say that like I was old, but for the first time getting on a motorcycle, I was older. And so I was excited and terrified all at the same time.
I'm almost 40 or I turn 40 next year, and I would be terrified to get on a motorcycle.
It was, and you know what? I can't say that I became like the world's best motorcyclist. I didn't. And there were certain like big, powerful motorcycles that I would never ride. Like I get on the back of them. Like we did some cross countries and I was like, I'm not confident enough in my riding ability to do the cross country. So, but I would ride on a motorcycle. I would just get on the back to do like our ride to Sturgis. But I would do shorter rides. I mean, we rode across South Africa. We rode through Brazil. We rode up to the the Redeemer statue in Rio. Like I've ridden in Vietnam. I've ridden in India. I have ridden to Sturgis and back. I don't know how many times. So it was very cool. And some I was like riding and some I was like, you know what? I'm a passenger on the back and I'm okay with that. Like no shame in that game. So it was really cool. I was able to say yes, and I stepped all the way into it, and I did it in my way, in a way that felt safe for me, and a way that felt edgy enough, but still comfortable.
Right.
And I have no regrets that I did. It was fun. I owned my own motorcycle. I mean, how many people get to say that?
That's so cool. Do you still ride?
No, I don't. There's a whole different reason for that, which plays into my story. The Well, let me just say this and then we can circle back because I want to make sure that we bring people to what I started feeling at Harley and why I left. But so just to put a pin in that, something happened when I ended up leaving Harley and went on sabbatical that made me just pause on riding. And to be truthful, I just haven't gotten back to it. I still love Harley. I still love motorcycles, but that is not a part of my life right now. I didn't leave riding because I left Harley. So that's one point. So let me back up and answer your question. So I'm now at Harley. I didn't start as their CMO. I started as VP of global marketing, helping to create a truly global marketing organization, pulling all of the different regions together, really setting us on a more unified, like, global brand path than the company had ever been on, blah, blah, blah. One thing, comes to another. There was turnover, whatever. My boss ends up leaving the company. And somewhere down the line, I become chief marketing officer. And so
Was there a moment for you there where you were just like, wow? Like, did you take a moment to be like, wow? That's all I can think of to say, because that was what my moment was when I was like, I've worked my whole career for this and I got it. And then there was also a lot of fear with that. So I'm just curious because, like, you were at, still really young. Like, there's not a lot of CMOs that are 40 years old.
Yeah,
like maybe...
so I was probably 43 or 44 when I became, I took on that responsibility. Yeah, I mean, I think there was a wow, and this is the perfect segue into, the beginning of the next chapter and what happened and why I'm not still at Harley today. So yeah, there was definitely oh my God. And I think it was so organic because from the time I set foot in Harley, I really loved the brand and I loved the experience. And like, I just went, this is a pun in every way, but like whole hog into it. Right. So I was just all in, and so I was in it, and I kept taking on more and more and more responsibility. So yeah, I think there was that moment where it was like, oh, wow, I'm suddenly doing this thing that I had dreamt of so many years ago when, like, my dad left Pillsbury and ultimately went to be the chairman and CEO of Haagen-Dazs ice cream. Like, he had like worked for all of these incredible brands. And I'm like, oh my God, this is like what my dad used to always talk about. Like, I'm doing the thing. And my dad at the time was like, Shelley, you're going to be president of Harley. Just like, keep going, keep going. And I remember him saying that. And I was like, yeah, okay, well, all right. But then what happened, and this was the final year. So I was at Harley for a total of 6.5 years. And in my final year there, which was like, I was 45 into 46 years old, I just started to have these feelings like, yeah, this looks really awesome on paper, and I've done the thing, and I'm at the top of the proverbial mountain that I feel like I've been chasing and climbing breathlessly for so long. And I actually feel kind of miserable. And how is it that the outside of your life, like, I am like, I'm walking into a boardroom in black leather and jeans and boots, and I'm riding motorcycles around the world, and I'm stewarding a brand as iconic as Harley Davidson. How is this even possible? And honestly, that's what I was asking myself. Like, at night, I was really scared, because I thought, how do you get to this place? And I'm in rarefied air. And yet I felt so exhausted. I felt so burned out. I felt so alone. I felt really terrified that I like, none of it felt like this just like nothing was making sense to me. And so then I started asking this, and then I felt really guilty for even going, is this all there is? I'm like, oh my God, how privileged do you have to be, girl, to even ask that question? And listen, I acknowledge my privilege and good fortune. Like, I am not shying away from that piece of my entire story. And there are certain times where like we just have to let ourselves feel all the things. And so I was like, I felt so much guilt and shame around this question. Is this all there is? And I think because I was trying to deny it, I was trying to stuff it down. I was drinking myself to sleep every single night, a lot. And then a nightmare started coming to me and waking me up in the middle of the night, every single night, 2 a.m. And it was 1,000,000%, I know this to be true, the universe and my soul conspiring to wake me the fuck up to what is my truth and my definition of success. And so, you know, now hopefully your listeners are starting to put the pieces together from the very beginning of this conversation.
Got goosebumps because this is my favorite part.
But you know, like I was terrified. I woke up drenched and bawling my eyes out at 2 a.m. every day, and I couldn't get back to sleep. So then by 6:30 in the morning, I'm just putting makeup on and putting all the things, shiny objects on, and I'm pretending everything's okay, and I'm going back at it, and I'm pretending that I'm okay and everything's okay. And you and I are very aligned on mental health advocacy, and I was not okay. And I now know that it's okay to not be okay. And I now understand that it's okay to not be okay and ask for help. But I didn't understand any of that then. And so I was very alone and very tortured, and yet in this very privileged, unbelievably rare position. And that went on for the entire final year I was at Harley. And about 3 to 4 months in, I could barely cope. I was so exhausted. I wasn't sleeping. Now I'm drinking even more, trying to incapacitate this nightmare, that I went to see an integrative medicine doctor who I'd been introduced to through Harley. And I just said, help, please, please help. I don't know where to turn. I don't know who to ask. And I know I don't have the resources to figure this out on my own. And I give myself a lot of credit because I wasn't raised in a family that taught me any of this. We didn't talk about anything. In fact, my parents still don't talk about anything. The fact that I wrote this book and like shared my whole heart and soul with the world is like blah to them. But
what
anyway,
a generational gap, though, right?
Huge generational gap. And I feel, I mean, listen, there's no greater work in the world than having these conversations that you and I and your whole community have. So like, moment of gratitude for that.
Thank you.
It was a huge turning point for me. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I remember Dr. Bob was this guy's name. And I was like, Dr. Bob, like, please help me. Like, I can't function, and I don't want people to know I can't function. And so he introduced me to a book called Breakfast with Buddha, and this idea of monkey brain and the notion or the concept of meditation, which I had never been exposed to before. And that begun this very slow journey to me suddenly getting quiet enough to understand what the nightmare was trying to tell me.
Ooh.
And that's when it hit me. So now we're probably 6 months into this. And it hit me like a ton of bricks while my eyes were closed. And I was meditating one morning, and I saw that what I was seeing in my dream was my dog who had died before I went to Harley. And in my nightmare, I'm seeing that he is still alive in a closet, basically malnourished, dying on the floor because I have forgotten about him. He is longing for love and attention and nourishment and all of it. And in that moment, when Dr. Bob gave me these tools and I slowed down long enough to pay attention, I understood that Mocha, my dog, was a proxy for my soul. And that changed my whole life and the trajectory of my life to where 7.5 years later, I am having this conversation with you. It changed everything for me.
I love that. I hate that part of the story because the thought of a dog suffering is one of the worst things that
Oh,
I can imagine.
can you
But
imagine? Like, you know why I wasn't sleeping? Because, like, the idea that I would forget that my fur baby was alive. But then you also go, wait a second. The idea that you would forget that your soul is alive and it's talking to you every day, and you're kind of doing the same thing. You're like, go away, stop. I'm not listening. Push it down. We're doing the same thing to our souls.
yeah, why do you think that is? I mean, you had climbed to what some people, like I said earlier, would look at and be like, CMO of Harley Davidson, got our shit together, totally unapproachable, so successful, so much money, so happy, all the motorcycle, all of it. But like inside, you were just slowly dying. Like, what's
Yeah.
causes that? Because I know that feeling, and I know a lot of people that know that feeling, even if they don't understand, they know that feeling. What,
Yeah.
like, is it cultural? Is it this country? Because I know I have a whole lot of experience working with European countries, Scandinavian countries. They do their stuff a lot better over there, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah. Yeah.
curious, as someone
It's
who's
a
traveled the
whole
world.
different support system and infrastructure and social system and all of that. So it's not to say that some of these same issues don't exist around the world. I think that it's very acute here in the United States, and probably to some degree the United States and Canada, so like North
Hmm.
America. I've learned so many things because obviously that awakening led me on a path to say, I have to take some time. I spent about 6 months laying a foundation to leave Harley because I wanted to leave Harley in a way that felt like it respected the brand, it respected my team, it left everyone in good shape. I was not ready to burn bridges. I really wanted this to be a beautiful departure because it kind of felt like my second divorce, and I wanted to do it in a
Mm,
very loving way, loving to them and loving to myself, and pave this way forward because I didn't know what this was. So, I called the journey my soul sabbatical because I didn't know how to talk about it. I had no idea how to explain that I wasn't going on vacation and I wasn't taking a traditional sabbatical. I was going to reconnect with myself and my soul and really understand, like, who am I and what's
yeah.
going on and what lights me up and how do I define success and what am I without the identity of my corporate career, which is all I had ever been. And a few insights, I mean, many insights have struck me since then. A lot of them are in the book, so you're only going to get the sort of highlights version in this
Yeah.
conversation. However, to answer your question, one of the big ones that hit me is that we are handed these societal scripts, whether they come from our parents, our culture, our community, our religion, our peers, whatever it is, that say, this is what success looks like. And very often, those scripts are like boxes. It's like ticking the boxes. It's the checklist. It's like, well, check the list on these titles and these material goods and this level of income and blah, 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 blah. These accolades, these achievements,
Titles. Yeah.
right? So, and what struck me and what is at the core of my work now is this idea that success is a feeling, not a checklist.
Yes. 100%. Yes.
Right? And so I think as the more, like, I get that there are many layers underneath that. I'm not like, oh, boom, it's that simple. Well, it is that simple. And I'm not naive enough to believe that there isn't work to be done. But I really think if we approach this, like, think about what is your success currency? I know for so long, mine was staked on my entire identity being, what titles did I hold? What sexy brands did I serve? And how much was I making? That was it.
Yeah. I've
And
been there.
okay, great. And by the way, I'm not poo pooing making money. Like, I live in a nice house. I still
Yeah.
need to pay my mortgage. So, but what I'm saying is, so as an example, I have shifted my success currency. I now talk about it in terms of impact. So I really think about my work and my, I say I'm on a, I'm on a mission to liberate 1 billion souls from success empty to success full.
Yeah.
And that idea of successful is that we get to define success on our own courageous terms that are are in alignment with our truth. And that at the end of the day, it's how we feel. And that just fundamentally shifts a conversation around success in terms of you and I individually. It also shifts the conversation around the cultures and the structures and the systems we build. I mean, talk about, maybe that is why the Scandinavian countries in particular have it so dialed in, because humanity and well-being and soul are at the heart of the way their cultures are built. Yeah. Like on the broadest scale and in the company cultures that they create. And so I just I'm on a mission to, lock arms with more people to ensure that we're headed in that direction, like individually, on a company level, and on a broader cultural level.
And I love, love, love that mission, 100% support that mission. And I think, honest to God, we need more people, especially people who have been leaders, to speak up and speak out like this, because I know there's this disconnect between someone who's a CEO, a CMO, and an executive at a big company, and people who are, struggling to get by and struggling to pay their rent every month, or now to, get eggs and milk and basic things that you need to consume with inflation and all that stuff. And so I think like those people don't always have the time to do this kind of work. And not that, you do, but like, I think leaders need to like be leaders and lead with empathy and help people. I always say as a leader, empathy is super important for sure, but like you have to set your people up for success. You have to give them space to be human. You have to give them space to find like their meaning in what they're doing. And I think it's so much about productivity and output and checking a list, or what are you delivering? And we lose track of that connection that we should feel to the work that we do. And I think leaders need to speak up about it more.
Yeah. And exactly. I think speak up about it more. And for me, what I want to do is pay it forward. Like I have time to do it because I've made this my life's work. This is my North Star. Like the reason, like on the hardest days, the day after I gave my TEDx talk is a great example. On the hardest days, I still get out of bed because I know I was put on this earth to do this work. I spent 26 years having an amazing career in the corporate world that I don't regret for a second, to be on this journey now. And so what I say now, and actually this is becoming the title of one of my keynotes, I say, I quit so you don't have to.
I love that.
And it's my mission in the world to pay forward my learnings and my insights. So the leaders who are in the companies today, who are entrepreneurs, founders, in transition, wherever you are, or frankly, the next generation of leaders. This is why I love having conversations with you, Nick, because we're like adjacent generations. I'm Gen X, you're millennial, and then we're talking to probably millennials and Gen Zers here. And I love that because, and actually I've been doing some guest lecturing at Northwestern University, and I may be teaching there more often starting next year. And one of my missions is that this is a multi-generational message. And I know that your generation and the generations after you are like, hell no, Gen X and baby boomers, we are not doing this the way that you guys have been doing this. And I am like, yes. And here's what I've learned so that you can carry the torch forward.
Like skip the part you've learned. Skip that part. We don't have to learn that. You've learned it for us. I love that.
Totally. And I've heard from I've heard from millennials and Gen Zers who've read my book, and honestly, that's probably one of the most surprising things and one of the greatest gifts that I didn't see coming is for people to go, thank you for sharing your mistakes. Thank you for sharing your insights and your lessons, because we want to skip past that. And I don't mean skip the hard parts of life. We're all going to get the hard
Yeah.
parts of life, and we're all going to have our lessons in our own ways. But the more I can pay forward what I learned so that the generations behind me can go, yeah, we want to take those and we're going to
Build
blaze
upon them.
yeah, like
love
a
it.
bold, brave, badass new leadership trail forward. I'm like, here, let me feed you all the things. Go. Like, go forth and be badass. So,
I love
yeah,
it.
that is for sure. So that's why another reason I love having this conversation is I know I'm speaking to people who are younger than me, and that lights me up too. I'm like, however I can spread the word, share my learning, say, don't do it like I did it. Here's what I learned. And I share my very intentional choices, and my keynotes are now about this kind of, I learned that sabbatical doesn't mean leaving your job. It means finding yourself and stepping into a way of being, a way of leading. And so that part is really, really cool because I can share the intentional choices we can make that look very different from the choices I was making back in those days, so that, yeah, we can blaze a new trail and we can tear down this kind of generations old patriarchy driven definition of success that's not serving anyone.
Well, it's only serving like a handful of people at the top that make money on all of us. But that's, I love this mission. I obviously have been, I'm so supportive of you and what you do. And I want to make sure that everybody listening to this is supportive, because I find it hard pressed to find a credible source that would be able to argue against any of this. So thank you for sharing that. And your story is so inspiring. And I know you've got to go here in a minute, but before we head out, I'm going to give you a chance to ask me anything. And I promise I'll be super brief and quick so you can get out to your plans for the evening.
I'm curious, from your experience, and you're still in the corporate world, like, what's the one piece of leadership advice you would give Gen Z or Gen Alpha, or like these next generations of leaders that are coming up behind us?
Oh my gosh, that's a good question. I think, and I'll write sometimes on LinkedIn about like being a real leader, not just a leader on paper or a leader in title, right? And I think that one thing that has really helped me, and I think more people should do, is, and I understand you're still a leader, you still have those responsibilities, right? But get to know your people on a human level. And I learned this during COVID, when all of our interactions in business became very transactional through Zoom meetings, right? So there wasn't the going to lunch anymore. There wasn't going for an afternoon walk anymore. There wasn't running into someone at the coffee machine, or taking
Yeah.
that meeting from a meeting room out to a cafeteria and just grabbing a snack. Like all of those things where you would make that connection now became almost transactional. How was your weekend? Good, across a Zoom message. So what I had started to do then, when I realized everything was transactional, we were kind of losing any connection, is I took all of our one-on-ones, which I have weekly one-on-ones with people on my team. And I do that because I want to be on the same page all the time, and also make sure that they know that they're a priority to me. But I had everyone do the 16 personalities test online,
Oh, yeah.
which is Myers-Briggs, right? A simpler version of it. And then I had everybody present like 5 minutes on what they learned, what they were surprised about, and anything that would help the team sort of know how to better work with people, right? So there were all these things. And then I took our one-on-ones and I made them personal. I was like, if this is a work-related thing we need to talk about, let's do that. That's cool. But we can also use our project management tool to manage projects. So why don't we just try and build connection? Tell me what movies and
Oh,
shows you're watching.
beautiful.
And I
Yeah.
think too, it opened up a door for people to be able to have space and take up space in a work environment. And if someone had a personal issue or something, and they didn't have to say what it was, but like when you have that human connection with someone, and it becomes less transactional and less just this business conversation of I need you to do something, or I tell you to do something, you do it. You build that human connection. It becomes much more natural to sort of sidestep some of that transactional stuff and really, help that person grow and help that person feel comfortable and trust in you and trust in the work that they're doing and where it contributes. And I think that's something that really misses from a lot of leadership.
Yes, what just like popped in my head, I say this a lot, and your story so beautifully illustrates it. Like, when we show up as humans, we give others permission to show up as humans, period.
Yeah, you said it better than I did and much more succinct. So that's exactly it. And we're
It's
all
beautiful.
human beings first. We are all human beings first. And I always, with marketing too, because I do B2B software marketing. So our software is being, sold to giant corporations that are like, billions of dollars in manufacturing. But I always tell my marketers, I'm like, hey, we may be doing, quote, B2B marketing, but there's still a person on the other side that you're trying to resonate with. So you have to have that human connection in there.
Yes.
So I think that's something that a lot of people lose track of. We're all human. So
bring the humanity, the well-being, and the soul back into it. Boom. We brought it home.
Let's do it. I love it. So tell people where they can find you. And of course, all of those links will be in the show notes too.
Yeah. The two platforms that I play the most on are LinkedIn. So I'm Shelley Paxton with an EY. You'll see it, Shelley Paxton on LinkedIn, and at the Shelley Paxton on Instagram. So those are my things. And my website, shelleypaxton.com. You can learn everything about me. My book, in all of its forms, is on Amazon or your favorite bookseller. And I think that's it. And if you need a keynote speaker, you can find more about my speaking on my website and all the things. So thank you.
I highly recommend it. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, this is amazing. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this week's episode of Eyes Wide Open. If you enjoy the show, the best way to support us is by sharing or dropping a review. For more information and content, check out engagewithnick.com or find me on Instagram at nthompson513. Don't go through life blind. Do the work so you can show up in the world with your eyes wide open.